Hello, my name is Danny Krastick. You are listening to 90.3 WMSC Upper Montclair. I'm one of the co-hosts of Movies Till Midnight, and we have once again a very special guest with us here today, a musician, an actor, and a really great guy. Would you like to introduce yourself for our listening audience?
Hi, Danny, and hi, everybody that might be listening. My name is Steve Wall. I'm an Irish actor, musician, and I'm from the west of Ireland, but based in Dublin, Ireland.
Very nice. Well, like we just said, you started off as a musician, obviously, and you've done a lot of musical stuff, so which we will definitely talk about. But how did you first start getting into acting on screen?
Well, before I got into music, I actually wanted to be an actor. So the acting bug kind of came first, but I never got to do it. I was brought up in the west of Ireland, first of all in Dublin and then the west of Ireland. And the secondary school that I was in back then, there wouldn't have been much in the way of teaching of the arts and all of that. It was just
Hmm.
it was they were called the Christian Brothers. They're not really around much anymore, and they have a bit of a bad reputation in Ireland. They're sort of like a priest, but without the full sort of what Christian Brothers are.
Yeah.
Scary black kind of long soutanes as they're called, and if they were in Star Wars, they'd be the baddies. And so things like drama and art and all that were not high on the curriculum, if at all. And I just got really into watching films because we were so starved of movies there. There was a cinema that just popped up every now and then, and we only had one television station when
Wow.
we moved to the West. So this was 1976. So we had one television station in the west of Ireland, and it was the Irish National Station. They added one more to it then, so we were spoiled for choice. And RTE1 and then RTE2. So I remember seeing Rebel Without a Cause with James Dean when I was about 16 or so, maybe 15. And it just blew my mind. Everything about him, his style of acting and everything. I didn't know anything at that age about his style of acting or anything, but I was just really drawn to him, and I found him totally magnetic. And
Hmm.
I think I couldn't figure out why that was. And then I started to watch, whenever a good film would come on the television, I'd bags my time on the television. I'd say everybody else has to leave me at it. And I'd watch things like On the Waterfront or The Pawnbroker, which also features Rod Steiger, and any good films that came on. And I just became besotted with film and acting. And then when I was leaving school, I applied for some of the acting colleges in London, like RADA and Lambda and the Guildhall and all of that. But I had no hope of getting in because I was just some kid from the west of Ireland, the last outpost of Europe. And so yeah, I ended up going to college and doing a year of mechanical engineering.
Oh, wow.
Uh, why I do not know. I got accepted into it somehow, and I failed it miserably, because basically the non-attendance of lectures. And then I joined a band when I was in college as a guitarist. I joined a punk new wave band called New Testament, and um, and that was brilliant because I just met so many new people through that. All the people like the art students and the musicians, and that was kind of like I think I found my tribe. It definitely wasn't amongst the mechanical engineers, but I've definitely realized I probably should have done art or something like that, or drama. And but so it then that was kind of the start. I played in the band for about 3 years, and then I joined a theater company. Um, After that, because I still, had ambitions to be an actor. But I ended up working for a couple of years as kind of assistant stage manager. I only got one walk-on part to deliver one line in the 2 years I was there. So I departed from that company. It was a great experience. I really enjoyed every minute of it, and I moved to Dublin to try and pursue acting. And and I was just unemployed for a year. This was pre-internet days, so I didn't even know, you wouldn't hear what auditions were happening or anything.
Mm.
I remember talking to an established actor at one point, and he told me there was two or three pubs that I had to drink in if I wanted to find out what was going on, because that's where the actors drank. So it was like I think three pubs, Neary's pub, Sheehan's, and the Flowing Tide near the Abbey Theatre. And I was told I had to drink there, and because the actors, that's where the actors hung out, and that's where you found out what was going on. So after about a year of not getting any work or not even hearing about auditions, I decided to start a band myself, and that became kind of my life for the next 25 years. The
Mhm.
band became quite successful in Ireland, and the band are very well known. We still perform actually, and the band is called The Stunning, and so we do, maybe we do like a dozen shows every year, mostly just in Ireland. We have performed in the States and in the UK, and um, but now it's just we just kind of stick with Ireland.
Mm.
So I'm trying to juggle that now with I went back to acting in was it I started doing acting workshops in around I think it was 2011 or so, and
Mm.
um, and that's when I started back into it. So I'm kind of like in a way a late starter, because most guys my age that are actors are quite established.
Mm.
So if I am going for an audition, usually I'm up against some kind of some fairly heavy hitters, which is it can be tough.
Yeah, I'm sure. But you did just have a pretty big movie that was in theaters not that long ago. Am I do you want to tell everyone what movie that was?
Dune, Dune 2, is that what you mean?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, yeah,
You were
yeah,
in Dune. So is it true that you only had like 8 hours of prep time between like when you got notified to when you had to be on set?
yeah, yeah. I
That's
was actually I had just dropped my daughter to school in Dublin, and I was driving somewhere, probably to we have a little recording studio, and I got a call. I got a call at around 10 in the morning, basically asking, could I fly to Budapest that evening? And I had auditioned for two characters in it, but that was like a month previously or something. So I
mhm.
forgot about it. Basically, um, I knew it wasn't going to happen. So that, I send off audition tapes and then I just forget about them because it's the best thing to do. But it was unusual to get a call back about that quite, you know, at that sort of short notice. So I figured somebody else must have been cast in the role and something happened. I have no idea. But they came back to me. I had auditioned for one of the Fremen,
Mhm.
um, and then for Bashar as well, the Sadakar. And so they came back and they just said, we need you for Bashar. It's a very small part. Um, but it still took about 5 days to shoot that big scene.
Mhm.
So it was great. So that evening, I arrived in Budapest, and I think it was it was quite. They couldn't get a direct flight from Dublin to Budapest, so I went via Amsterdam, and with connections and everything, it took about 9 hours. I mean, I would have been in Vancouver, and it took about 9 hours by the time from Dublin to the time I got to the hotel in Budapest. Then
Wow.
the next morning, they picked me up really early the next morning. First thing is they did costume fitting to make sure I fitted
Hmm.
in the suit, which was fine. And then they did a kind of a hair and makeup consultation, and then I was brought in to the studio set to meet Denis Villeneuve, and who was just extremely nice, a real gentleman. And um, and then he said, "Come over and meet the cast." And you see, I hadn't even seen the first Dune at that stage,
Really?
so Yeah, I
Yeah,
hadn't
I was
seen
gonna
it.
ask that as like, did you know anything about like what you were getting
No,
yourself into?
nothing. I didn't even see the original David Lynch ones. I knew
Wow.
nothing. All I knew was it was set in space. Hence the
Yeah.
space suit. So I knew nothing. And so I didn't know who was in it or anything. So we walked over to meet the rest of the cast, and Dunny introduced me to Christopher Walken, Charlotte Rampling, Florence Pugh, Austin Butler, Stellan Skarsgård, Dave Bautista. Um, I think it was just them. And so I was actually quite gobsmacked. I was I just had this big silly grin on my face. It was like, oh, it was like fancy meeting you lot here. And so I was quite taken aback, but it was funny. And I had just seen the Elvis movie only a week previous
Mhm.
to that. And so I was fascinated actually to talk to Austin Butler about it because I'm a big Elvis fan. And so we had some good chats actually because I played Chet Baker in a film in a Dutch film that came out in 2018.
Yeah.
And he when I told him that it blew his mind because he took out his phone straight away and he says, "Man, look." And his Spotify was still open and he was just listening to Chet Baker.
Wow.
And he said he'd been listening to Chet Baker non-stop, like for the last week or something like that. It was like he just discovered him or something. And so we had some good chats about, playing music legends. And
Mhm.
I had some clips. I had a clip actually of my other band, The Walls. We did an Elvis cover, a song called Crawfish. And I had a clip of that on YouTube. So we were just talking music all the time, you know. And it was great experience. It was a delight to be involved in it. A very small role in it, but to meet all of those actors and Denis Villeneuve, who was an absolute gentleman.
Yeah. Well, now that you've been part of the Dune universe now, have you watched the first one yet? Have you gone back and
I
reabsorbed?
watched it. I watched it that night.
No, really.
Um, yeah, that night. After meeting Villeneuve because I was really nervous that he might say at some point, in the first film. And I just wanted to be ready for that. So
Yeah.
that night when I got back to the hotel, I watched part one and I was blown away by it. I just thought, oh my God, like I'm gonna be involved now in the second part, something that looks as good as this. And I thought it was just real quality. um, there's like even on the set where we filmed in the Imperial tent, I mean it was all built, all of the steps were built and the whole set was built, all the tiles that, the interior of it and everything. So there was no green screen or anything. It was
Really?
actual, yeah, it was all built.
Wow.
No, and like I worked on a Ridley Scott series a few years back called Raised by Wolves, and that was shot down in South Africa outside Cape Town. And he did the same thing. I mean, hugely expensive productions, but like he built all of this stuff, like the wreckage of where our spaceship crashed and all of this, and it was in this amazing mountainous area outside Cape Town.
Hmm.
And there was a lot of interesting locations around there. There was like sand dunes, and then there was very lush land, and then there was rocky places. So there was a lot of great locations for portraying a place that's on another habitable planet.
Yeah.
And but Ridley builds, he has all of this stuff built, so it really shows when you see it on screen. It's real because it looks real because it is real,
Yeah.
you know.
That's
And
awesome.
Villeneuve does the same thing, you know.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. Well, aside from Dune and film acting, we just talked about series. You also were in the Vikings show from a few years back. You were in the miniseries Rebellion, which I thought that was a good show. I've saw that show all the way through, like
Oh,
when it
really?
came
You
out.
watched
Yeah, like
Rebellion?
years ago. Yeah, like several years ago, like when it came out. Yeah, because my
Great,
family is like big Irish culture in the family and stuff like that. So they're like, oh,
great,
Ireland show, let's watch that.
great, great.
So what would you say are some of the biggest differences working in something like a film like Dune or even like some of the other not as big blockbustery movies as Dune versus working on something like a mini series or a big budget TV show like Vikings?
Um, well, I think the two best things I've done that I enjoyed most. One was a film called My Foolish Heart. That's the movie about Chet Baker, about his final days in Amsterdam. That was kind of Dutch art house. It was low budget, but it was a role that I um I really had to work hard to get into. And it was a huge challenge for me. It was the first time I played such a big role. But I was playing a real person. And so I really enjoyed the research element of it. And the other thing I really thoroughly enjoyed was a show called The English. And that's on Amazon, I think. It's on BBC in the UK on their iPlayer, and then I think it's on Amazon everywhere else in the world. And that's a six-part miniseries. And I suppose overall, it features it stars Emily Blunt and then a host of other Chaske Spencer as well, who's a great American actor, and then there's a host of other actors in it, and that's set in like 18 the late 1840s, 1847, and it really is sort of about the genocide of the Native Americans. I mean, that's kind of what's underlying it, even though there's a story that's running through it of a woman who's trying to find the man who's responsible for the death of her son. And it's a mystery throughout, how her son died and how this man is responsible. But on her journey, she's assisted by a Native American who has just left the American Army. He was a scout for the American Army. And he's been rewarded with a plot of land up in the northern states. So he's making his journey there, and he agrees reluctantly to assist her to get to this place where she thinks this man is the man she's seeking. And it was the cleverest script I've ever read. Very well researched scripts. So I played the foreman of a cattle ranch, a character called Thin Kelly, and um, and Hugo Blick, the writer director, he was very particular. He had spent some of his childhood in Montana, and he was very particular about the accents, and he didn't want because there was a lot of European actors in it, English and Irish, and he didn't want them doing like Southern states, Texas accents, and all of this, which is your cliched kind of cowboy.
Yeah.
Um, he was really quite adamant that he wanted North Dakota, um, Montana, Wyoming,
Yeah.
So to me, that is just sheer enjoyment of researching that. And like I watched loads of Westerns. I listened to loads of, you know, um, different people on YouTube, with those accents and all of that. And then the shoot was delayed by 3 months because of COVID, which gave me even more time. So I was actually doing some home decorating. I was painting my house, and I would just have headphones on, and I was like listening to these voices and repeating them, and it was like learning a song, like learning a melody.
Yeah.
So that's I enjoy that kind of thing, I enjoy the challenge of getting a character right,
Yeah.
um, and the research element of it. And I've just like I'm only acting, I suppose, now for about 10 years, and I've kind of the one thing I've learned, and I've watched loads of actors and interviews and all these kind of things, and like when I was going to Holland to do the Chet Baker movie, I was so scared because it was such a big role
Hmm.
that I was actually looking up, Googling how to act. You know, like how do you prepare for such a role, you know? But there's no answers out there really. But all you can do is, I mean, you can find stuff where, you know, great interviews with other actors, and you know, I always find I do enjoy watching them, and you always come out with one little tidbit of something that you can grasp onto. And some actors are great with information like that. Um, Bryan Cranston, and you know, when they're interviewed,
Yeah.
and William, what's his name again? Uh, he's in Poor Things. Um,
Willem
why did I?
Dafoe.
Willem Dafoe. Willem Dafoe. Yeah, yeah, he's fantastic, and he's also
Mhm.
very generous whenever he's interviewed and giving advice and all of that. And I think that's great. And there's all you get something out of it, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, to shift away from your acting work and to shift into your music work for a bit. We usually don't talk about music stuff here on the show, but so you know this is new territory for us. But you
Yeah,
know we got you, so we're going to talk about
I'll
this a
go
little bit.
easy on you.
So you and your band, The Stunning, which we talked about already, recently had a documentary premiere about you guys in the band, which is called "We Come Alive." So what prompted you guys to want to make a film about yourselves and to make to get the ball rolling on that?
Well, I suppose if I'm honest, there was during the pandemic when no artists could do concerts for the best part of 2 years. You know, it was certainly a year and a half, and then they started allowing concerts with just like 50 people and you know all this kind of
Hmm.
stuff. But the government were making these grants available to artists and well venues and promoters mostly to put on shows. And some of the shows, if they couldn't happen in a venue, they could happen online. So at this point, everybody was tired of online shows. It was just, you know,
Yeah.
there was just so many of them on Facebook and all that. It was really like no one had any interest after about a year of that. So we um, we applied, myself and my brother applied for one of these grants, and we applied as producers. And we got in touch with the government department, and we basically asked them, what if instead of doing an online concert, which are shit and nobody likes, we said, what if we made a film, a documentary film? And they said, go ahead, just credit us at the end. So so that's what we did because you know we felt that you know these online gigs they come and go and nobody cares about them anymore. But we thought, well, if we made a documentary, so what we did was we got a load of other musicians involved, guest artists, and we brought them in a very kind of eclectic mix of artists. We brought them in to play on our songs and without any rehearsal. So we filmed the kind of the preparation of it, which is often a bit more interesting than concert footage. Like the kind of behind the scenes stuff is often more interesting. So we focused on that and of course the individual performances. But that's how that came about, and we're just about to release the soundtrack of it, all the songs. We're just about to release them on basically the various streaming platforms from which we will make zero practically.
Wow. Well, with both the Stunning and you have your other group, The Walls, which we talked about a little bit earlier. You've toured with a bunch of supporting a bunch of different acts. You toured with Red Hot Chili Peppers, Dylan, U2. So my question to you now is, do you have like a particularly funny or interesting or just a fun backstage moment with any of the acts that you've supported that you're like look back fondly on?
Oh, I remember when it was our first I think it was our first huge gig. Um, there were these festivals in Ireland. In the first one happened in 1990, and there had never been a music festival in Ireland for young people. You know, there were ones for sort of like there was a big folk festival that used to take place in the west of Ireland in a place called Lisdoonvarna, but there hadn't been any kind of festival where it was just all of the sort of acts like everyone from In Excess to Iggy Pop to Van Morrison to you know all the big names of the day,
Mhm.
Rage Against the Machine,
Yeah.
um, It was called Fela, and it took place in a stadium in County Tipperary, right in the middle of Ireland. And Fela is has kind of become the stuff of legends in Ireland when people look back on it. There were only uh, four festivals there, but it all took place in one stadium, not like modern festivals where you've got all of these different stages. This
Yeah.
was just one stage, one stadium, packed with about like 60,000 teenagers going absolutely crazy. And um, so we played that, the Stunning played that. We ended up playing it every year actually.
Oh wow.
But the second time, the first time we played it, we were on very early. We were on at like half one PM. And then the second time we were on second from the top. Brian Adams was headlining. And apparently he didn't want to go on last because he probably had a private plane and he wanted to, you know, get to some club in New York for the last drink. He wanted to just get out of there.
Yeah.
And, so they asked us, would we go on last? And we were really nervous about that because we thought, can you imagine us going on after Brian Adams? I mean, everybody is going to leave the stadium, you know? So we were shitting bricks, as the saying goes here. And so we had no kind of choice really. He didn't want to go on last, and that was it. So he did his set, and he was coming off stage, and you went down through. It was like a tunnel, where football players, because it was a football stadium.
Yeah.
So there's a tunnel where the football players go onto the pitch. So he was coming down the tunnel with all his band, and we were going on to get ready for our gig. And as he was passing us, my brother Joe said to him, "Thanks for warming them up, Brian." And I
Nice.
think it went down very well. But, I mean, Joe is always the one for the sort of the humor, and if he thinks
Yeah.
it's a joke, he's not going to keep it to himself. But there's probably loads more that I can't think of off the top of my head because you know, I don't have any Dylan stories because we actually did. We opened for Bob Dylan about five times, and four nights in London, and then another time in Galway at a festival. And but you never even get to meet Dylan. He's just they cleared the backstage area when he's coming on.
Mhm.
Which is must be kind of boring. Because like we do things, it is nice to meet people, and
Yeah,
you know.
I'm sure. Yeah. So let's move a little bit broader now. Let's move back from just in general. For you as someone in the creative arts, what drives you?
I think with music, I suppose the most satisfying thing with music is to write a good song, and it's also one of the hardest things. Um, and I think it gets harder the older you get because you're more kind of critical of your own work. But I think that quest to write a great song is something that drives me. I'm working on a couple of songs. I haven't written a song in ages, like years, and but I've started doing it again over the last few months, and we've been mostly playing at our concerts. We've been playing our back catalog, and there's quite a lot of stuff there between the two bands. So we can alternate our set, but I just really felt of late that the urge to write again, was very strong. So I know that feeling of when you crack a song, it's just really wonderful. There's nothing that can replace it. And other than when you perform it live for the first few times, and you just see, especially if the audience reaction is good. And then when it gets to a point, I mean, when the Stunning play, the audiences know all the words of nearly all our songs, and it really is an honor, and it's flattering to have, a few thousand people singing your
Yeah.
songs back at songs that were written on an acoustic guitar in a bedroom, and you just never know how they're going to turn out. And then to get to a point where people are singing those songs back to you, and where those songs, they kind of, it's like you don't have ownership of them anymore. They've become a part of people's lives, and it's certain songs or albums become a soundtrack to people's lives. So the Stunning were kind of the soundtrack to a generation of Irish people, probably late 80s, early 90s. The band split up in 94, and then we reformed about 10 years later. But that's generally the kind of feedback we get from people, was that our music was kind of a part, it was a soundtrack to all of these uh, moments in people's lives around that age when they were probably students. And
Yeah.
so it's a really nice thing to hear that the music really meant something, and they have a very emotional and, I suppose, nostalgic connection to it.
Yeah.
Now those Stunning fans, they come out, they're bringing their sons and daughters, and so you have all of these. We meet these kind of a younger crowd at the gigs, and they all say, that they grew up hearing their parents playing the music in the car or at home. So it was kind of like
Aw.
they're it's in their subconscious.
Yeah. I love that. So, I mean, what's next for you, both in music and film? Do you have any other projects coming up? Are you working on anything, or
Um, yeah, working on music at the moment, and we've there's a few gigs in Ireland. There's about, maybe, I don't know, it's for like maybe 8 shows coming up or so. There's like 4 festivals during the summer, in various parts of Ireland, and they're always great fun, because we get to meet lots of other artists, on these, and it's always very a social occasion as well for the artists to meet up. And then we have shows scattered right up to Christmas, up to December. Um, I'm also trying to keep kind of shows to a minimum, because acting stuff tends to come in very last minute,
Mhm.
and it's quite a gamble, because sometimes if I got cast in a big show, I mean, it happened before actually with Raised by Wolves, the Ridley Scott thing, and they wanted me to go to Cape Town, for this period. I think it was from like the 5th of May to for 3 weeks or something. And but I had one concert on the 5th of May, and on these big shows, like, the scheduling is a nightmare because there's so many people and cogs in the wheel, and so it's possible to actually lose a job
Mhm.
if there's a clash of a conflict of interests on something like that. So I'm always just hoping that when because gigs are booked way much further in advance, and acting stuff is surprisingly last minute,
Yeah.
as
Well,
as
yeah.
Dune attests
Yeah.
to.
Yeah. No, I can't even imagine, like, honestly, like that's so little prep time for something, for something as big as Dune. Like, that's
Well,
insane.
thankfully I only had one line, but
Yeah.
most of it is that it's not about even the one line. It's about just keeping your shit together. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
and not losing it. It's like, oh my God, I'm talking to Christopher Walken. It's just about, like, staying calm and actually
Yeah.
delivering the goods,
Yeah.
hitting your mark every time, delivering
Absolutely.
the line, just,
Yeah.
not missing the head.
Yeah. Well, what kind of advice do you have for people who are trying to get into the industry, both in film and with music? Like, do you have any words of wisdom you can give
Wow.
people from that you've learned from your journey so far?
I don't really, uh, I don't, it's like with the acting thing, my daughter is she's in college. She's finishing up actually soon, and she's done a year of performance, drama and performance, and she wants to continue that. And it's crazy, but because I'm sort of trying to get her to do something else as well. Um, because with acting, um, a lot of the time, unless you're creating your own projects, unless you're writing or working with a group of people to put on theater shows or writing a script or doing a pilot or something, unless you're actually creating your own work, then somebody else decides whether you work or not.
Yeah.
That's not a good position to be in, where somebody else has the power and you have zero power. So, that's the only thing I would say to young actors is have something else, because you need to hang on to some power yourself. You need to have your own power,
Yeah.
because it's acting sometimes it's like a lottery. Um, you can hope and you can stay at it and all, but I mean there are some actors that get a break and they get into a show that goes viral, and that's sort of the association with, even if they have a small part in it, the association with that show can
Yeah.
give them momentum, and it can open doors. But not every actor gets that, you know what I mean? You could be an actor,
Mhm.
you could be doing loads of different shows, and there's so much stuff out there to watch at the moment. Only a few things get to the point where they're like, White Lotus, or Succession, or whatever. Um, so I think most actors do have to have other jobs anyway. But to have something that you can create yourself is a really good thing, you know.
Yeah.
And I suppose for me, that other thing would be music. And I mean, I had success with music before I started acting. So it's something that's always there, and I never want to take it for granted, because it's been good to me, even though it's mainly Ireland. We're not a big international actor or anything, but we can do enough in Ireland that just keeps us ticking over.
Yeah.
Uh, and if you're not a creative, not everybody writes. But I would like, I've talked to my daughter recently about it, and I was saying there's so many courses that you can do in everything to do with sustainability, like interesting things, because that's the way the world is going now. People are more interested in, you know, uh, natural products, uh, growing your own food, and organic produce, and all this kind of thing. So you could do something that's not necessarily academic, that is actually um, that's actually fun to do, good for the planet, and it's something that you can make your own. You can, so to have something that you can do outside of it, and not to be waiting for the phone to ring or for your inbox to ping, because it's very disheartening, and a lot of time can go by
Mhm.
if you're waiting for someone to contact you.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we have one more question for you, and this is how we end our interviews with all our guests. But we're gonna shake it up a little bit this time. We always ask our guests, what is your favorite movie of all time? But we're gonna throw you a second question also. Do you have a favorite album of all
Oh yeah. I think my favorite movie of all time is probably Fellini's Amarcord. Um, Amarcord. Do you know it?
I've heard
Amarcord.
of it, yeah. But for,
I
for, for our
love.
listeners who don't, though, what can you tell us a bit about that?
It's just a fantastic it's a fantastic sort of introduction to the world, the crazy imagination of Federico Fellini. And I just love the breadth of his movies and the imagination,
Hmm.
and the things they did with characters and props. I'm a big fan of Fellini. Like, I love Eight and a Half, and La Dolce Vita is just amazing.
Yeah.
Um, but I love Amarcord because it's a bit more. It's very quirky, and the composer that did most of his films was a guy called Nino Rota, and the music is just wonderful, really
Mm.
wonderful. So I actually bought the soundtrack to Amarcord on vinyl years
Oh
ago.
yeah.
Yeah, so I have a soundtrack. It's lovely. And so just as a sort of slice of kind of slightly surreal and wonderful European cinema, I think you can't go wrong with Fellini. And Amarcord is great. Another great film, actually, that I would have seen around the same time was The Pawnbroker. I think I might have mentioned that earlier with Rod Steiger.
Yeah.
And, that's another one that I bought the soundtrack to because Quincy Jones composed the soundtrack and it's excellent.
Hmm.
And then music wise, my favorite album of all time is probably the Beatles' Revolver.
Let's
I
go.
don't know.
Twins.
Do you like that
Fantastic.
one?
Love it. Love it. That's
Yeah.
what I grew up with. You were saying like, oh, people, people grew up with your music and stuff like that, like played in the car. That's the kind of stuff my family plays in the car. So
Wow.
that's what I
Yeah.
grew up with. Yeah.
Good choice. Good choice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Revolver is just amazing. I mean, tomorrow never knows, and I'm only sleeping. There's a song on it, and your bird can sing. Oh, I just love that song.
Yeah.
It's like 2.5 minutes of just pure heaven.
Hmm.
And I think it's really when you hear it and you hear bands like the Smiths and all, and you can hear where those influences came from. They were
Hmm.
just a band, the Beatles at that time, they were just a tour de force of creativity. There was nothing
Yeah.
stopping them. It was incredible.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for joining us here on the show tonight. If you are interested in tuning in, listeners, again, we will be back next week, I believe is our last show of the year. That's very sad. But yeah, you can tune in at the same time, same place, and we look forward to seeing you there. See you guys next time. Have a good night.